Several Shinigami are obliterated by the Quincy, Vol standing activating across the replaced Sarite, and as you watch declares that it is time for the Gode 13 to despair, Candace notices that her wings have come out due to resonance, prompting Giselle to tell her to use it if she wants and deactivate her own since it makes her tired, prompting Candace to deactivate hers as well. Minioness peers over the edge and points out how Bambietta Quincy, Vol standing has activated as well, prompting Lil Toto says Bambietta was already mad at them for disappearing. Calling this scary, Giselle asserts that Bambietta is the last person who should be allowed to use the technique because of her stupidity and concludes that this battle will be over soon because of this development. Simultaneously, Shinji stands before Bambietta. Though Shinji claims that her transformation does not matter since her perception is still reversed, he is interrupted by a ring of explosions around Bambietta that send him flying through the air before a Rishi projectile slams into him on the ground, engulfing him in another explosion and leaving his chest smoking with a large wound, as Bambietta calls his technique lame and declares that she will simply destroy everything around herself with the explode in this case. After flying into the air and blanketing the ground below with explosions, Bambietta is startled when the smoke clears to reveal 7th Division Captain Saijin Komamura standing over Shinji. With Bambietta mockingly welcoming Komamura back, Hinamori leaps into air to attack her, and when Bambietta asks her whose lieutenant she is, manically grinning Bambietta to fire dozens of Rishi projectiles at her, forcing Komamura to grab Hinamori and pull her out of the air before she gets hit by the ensuing explosion. Landing on a rooftop below, Komamura chastises Hinamori for being so reckless and warns her that the projectiles cannot be stopped by Tobium or without armor. Suddenly, Bambietta flies right behind Komamura and comments on this assumption, prompting Komamura to draw his Zanpakuto and slash at her. Upon evading this and flying higher into the air, Bambietta mocks Komamura for thinking his helmet can protect him and fires a projectile at him, with Komamura noticing something about it and moving his head to the side as his left forearm blocks the blast. Sees that Komamura's left gauntlet has been destroyed by this, while Bambietta attributes Komamura's action to animal instinct and confirms that her projectiles cannot be blocked, revealing that the Rishi projectiles turn anything they touch into a bomb. Bambietta concludes that trying to deflect them at the last minute will not do anything and fires dozens more projectiles at Komamura. Hinamori get behind him just before the projectiles engulf the two of them in a massive explosion. However, with Bambietta inferring that only his armor is destroyed and hoping to see what lies beneath, she is confused when the smoke clears to reveal Komamura with a human face and body. In the past, Komamura stands before the defeated Wolfen clan elder while still in his Wolfen form. When a stunned Komamura repeats that their clan's secret technique is called the humanization technique, the elder confirms this and explains that the clan was sent to the animal realm for the sins they committed during their past lives, but were not resolved by this and so returned to Soul Society, before revealing that temporarily breaking the chain of sins that binds them allows them to return to the forms they had before they were condemned to being beasts, which lets them gain immense power in the form of the humanization technique. With Komamura wondering how it can be done, the elder tells him to give up his heart. Told to tear out his heart and offer it to the elder in return for the technique being bestowed upon him, Komamura simply looks at his hand. But when the elder assumes he cannot do this and asserts that this is fine since Komamura has no obligation to throw his life away for the Shinigami, Komamura counters that he does because Yamamoto took him in after he abandoned his clan to avoid having to hide any longer, leaving him with a vast debt to repay, and the Quincy killed Yamamoto, meaning that he must now do whatever it takes to avenge the latter before ripping his heart out of his chest while the elder watches. In the present, Komamura tells Hinamori to take Shinji and leave, which she complies with, prior to asserting that he has no choice in activating his Bankai, which summons his Bankai and shatters the armor encasing it. Flames begin burning in its eye sockets. Bewildered by this, Bambietta narrowly dodges a powerful strike from Tenjin and flies back as she comments on the lack of Wolfen traits even in Komamura's Bankai and fires dozens more projectiles at it. However, after Tenjin blocks the projectiles with its left hand, Bambietta is shocked to see that his hand is recovering immediately, leading Komamura to explain that Tenjin is an armored Bankai imbued with life and that Dange-jo strips it of its armor, leaving only its Ryatsu and power behind and preventing the explode from properly harming it. With Tenjin running toward and attempting to grab her, Bambietta flies around its hand, blasts it with another projectile when it reaches for her again, and evades a slash of its sword. Bombing Tenjin with another round of projectiles and flying out of the resulting cloud of smoke, Bambietta asserts that its Ryatsu being exposed means Komamura's weaknesses are as well and detonates several projectiles along the length of the left arm of Tenjin, only for Komamura to state that becoming a bomb and exploding is only frightening to something that is alive, such that there is no fear to be had when something is not alive. With Bambietta confused by this, Komamura clarifies that the life of Tenjin lies within its armor, meaning that Dange-jo strips it of its life as well. Bambietta demands to know what Komamura is talking about since she knows how Tenjin works from possessing it up until a few moments ago and is aware that its status is linked to that of its possessor before firing a dozen more projectiles, directly into the chest of Tenjin, resulting in a corresponding explosion on Komamura's own chest. Despite this, an initially confident Bambietta falters in her claim that Komamura is vulnerable even if Tenjin is not when she sees that his heart is missing from his chest, leaving a gaping hole on the left side. Komamura details how his body is now an empty shell meant for nothing more than the defeat of Bambietta's people, and reveals that the humanization technique offers his clan temporarily immortal bodies in return for their hearts, which means that he cannot die so long as he is in this form. Alarmed by this, a frightened Bambietta begins fleeing, with Tenjin leaping into the air after her and preparing to attack, and fires hundreds of projectiles behind herself as she expresses disbelief at Komamura throwing his life away since the point of battle is to avoid dying, which makes his choice apparently pointless. However, Komamura counters that he has staked his life instead of throwing it away since Yamamoto did the same for this war and proclaims that he had left his life behind before he even entered this battle while slashing his Zanpakuto forward, causing Tenjin to mirror his action and slash its sword into Bambietta, creating a massive explosion. Back at the fight, a stunned Bambietta realizes that her projectiles are not detonating in time. With Bambietta deducing that the force of the attack from Tenjin is pushing the projectiles back into her body before they can explode and expressing disbelief at this, the resulting explosion immolates her and sends her crashing into the ground below as Tenjin lands nearby and looks at Silburn in the distance, where Yuwatch and Yuryu behold it from the outdoor throne room. Suddenly, as he and Tenjin begin approaching Silburn, Komamura falls to his knees, causing Tenjin to mirror him a few seconds later and begin cracking while its head shatters. Komamura begs the humanization technique and his heart to last a little longer so he can reach Silburn and kill Yuwatch, who smiles and forces himself to stand up as his canine teeth begin to lengthen into fangs. Simultaneously, the Elder wonders if Komamura has noticed that his feelings are a desire for revenge, and that he is throwing his life away for vengeance just as he once saw Kenain Tozen do, but assures him that this is fine since revenge is their clan's true form and that he has finally come back to their clan. With his ears transforming into large wolfen ones, Komamura sees his left arm transform into a large four-fingered paw. Initially unsure of what this is, Komamura has fur envelop his body and feels his face protruding outward, while his feet transform into furred paws as well, leading him to realize that this is the price he must pay. Confirming this, the Elder notes that Komamura will soon lose his human body forever and transform into a beast of revenge prior to encouraging him to let his anger reach its limit, curse his place in life, and wallow in his vengeance, so that the Elder can sustain himself on it and live on. After thanking Komamura for becoming a beast that cannot speak for him, the pleased Elder leans down and consumes Komamura's still-being heart. Back in the city, Komamura lies on the ground, now a fully transformed and ordinary-sized wolf, and muses that this is the price of selling his soul for revenge and sullying the name of the Gode 13, rather than taking his words to Tozen as a warning to himself. Suddenly, his lieutenant Eva appears nearby with Shumbo, hoists Komamura over his shoulders, begins walking towards Silburn, and asserts that he did nothing wrong before declaring that they will confront Yuwatch and avenge Yamamoto. Elsewhere, Kang kneels among shattered ice and pants heavily prior to a shadow opening next to him and Uryu emerging from it. With Uryu doing the same to BG9 as the latter states that his damage has been repaired by 45%, Bambietta lies among the rubble in a different location with smoke coiling off her body and refuses to let herself be the first of her group to be defeated. However, she is interrupted when friends appear and stand over her, with Giselle promising to help her since they would be lonely without her despite Bambietta's pleas for her to stop. Meanwhile, Hizaji, Ikaku, and Yumichika stand over an incapacitated mask with their shikai. As Ikaku expresses amazement at the size of the explosion they just witnessed, Yumichika informs him that two Ryatsu signatures disappeared afterward, with one belonging to an enemy before a cursing Hizaji deduces that the other belonged to Komamura and attempts to run off. However, they are interrupted by James crying over Mask and begging him to get up. Though Ikaku is confused by the presence of a tiny old man and Yumichika tells him to not bother attacking since Mask cannot fight anymore, James' cries cause Mask's body to surge with energy and emit a bright flash of light, causing him to stand up and acknowledge James. With Ikaku, Yumichika, and Hizaji bewildered by this, Mask declares that a superstar always gets his second round, though Ikaku reminds him that he said this would be a one-round match, and has James ring the bell again. Hizaji tells Mask to stop joking and assumes a battle stance alongside Ikaku and Yumichika, but Mask claims that he is always serious and rushes forward to deliver a strong punch that knocks the three of them, where Mask kicks them down into the ground with enough force to incapacitate all of them. In the clearing dust, Mask pins down Hizaji with his elbow and counts to 3 in order to declare victory. Turning to James, a triumphant Mask muses that although he has finished off every captain they could find, it is lackluster for them to not have a crowd witnessing his feats, which James agrees with. Suddenly, 2 burning lights burst through the clouds, and when Mask notices this and wonders if he should investigate these new foes, James points out that the spectacle these 2 made would ensure Mask get in the spotlight if he defeats them, prompting Mask to decide to go after them and encourage James to keep up before Hizaji's shikai wraps around his ankle. Despite Hisaji refusing to be defeated just because Mask reached a 3-count, Mask yanks on the chain to pull Hisaji toward him, delivers a brutal clawless line to Hisaji in midair, and affirms that he does believe he won from that prior to attempting to stomp on a prone Hisaji. However, he is interrupted when 9th Division Captain Mugaruma stops Mask's foot with his own and admonishes Hisagi for getting knocked out, without displaying the results of his training before introducing himself to Mask when the latter asks him if he is associated with these Shinigami, leaving Mask elated to be facing a captain. Despite Mask explaining that he regrettably cannot fight Kensei because he is on his way to investigate the fallen objects, 3rd Division Captain Rose approaches him from behind and decries this since Mask has 2 captains to face, making them an excellent choice if he wants to garner a reputation. Mask leaps backward off Kensei's foot and challenges the 2 captains to come at him, leading Kensei to promise that they will not take too much of his time and Rose to smile with his Ambakudo, drawn as Mask chuckles and grins down at them. During this, a sweating Ichigo stands in the Irazu Sando and wonders what is happening while Ichigo muses that the way he feels is what he is trying to protect and reveals that what Ichigo is experiencing are the everlasting memories and revelations from the power of the Soul King. Experiencing the same visions as before alongside glimpses of the original captains of the Gode 13, Ichigo stops walking and is surrounded by surging golden, green, blue, and red Ryatsu that begins suffusing his body, causing Ishab to question if he is a vessel capable of holding the power he is filled with or a bowl that shatters. Suddenly, Ichigo envisions his body swelling up from the power entering him and screams in pain as 4 additional pupils appear in his eyes again, only for it to subside once he raises his wooden sword above his head, which Ichigo smiles at. In the aftermath, an exhausted Ichigo slowly walks forward and passes through the gate at the end of the path, taking him to the interior of Senjumaru Shutara's palace. Within Mayuri Hidden Laboratory, one of the technicians monitoring the replaced Sirite brings up a topographical map of the city produced by the Wandenreich and announces that the Gode 13 has roughly 42% of its forces currently alive, but its active military strength is less than 30%, prompting Akan to curse at the Wandenreich, trampling them in such a short amount of time as Urahara muses that they use the chaos to crush the Gode 13's chain of command. At Akon's behest, the technicians detail that 2nd Squad Captain Suifeng is currently injured and being transported by Lieutenant Marichio to the First Aid Station. 10th Squad Captain Hitsugayas has disappeared after his battle with Lieutenant Randaku status remaining unknown, and 11th Squad Captain Kenpachi is not responding to any of their calls, though Akon asserts that they can ignore this. In response, one of the technicians reveals that 9th Squad Captain Kensei and 3rd Squad Captain Rojuro are alright. Once the technicians conclude that Kensei and Rose are currently assessing their surroundings, Urahara observes that the remaining unseated Shinigami will just be hunted down at this rate, and after criticizing them for getting worked up just because their superior officers were killed since it indicates an inability to think and act for themselves, Mayuri contacts Captain Commander Shunsui and sarcastically suggests he rejoiced at the news of the Gode 13 losing 70% of its combat capability while he was sipping tea with the enemy. In turn, Shunsui admits that he ran out of tea and the enemy was about to sip on his blood. Telling Shunsui to do his job, Mayuri connects him to the Denrai Shinki of all remaining division members across the city and assures him that he can handle this since it is only 30% of their forces, which leads Shunsui to thank Mayuri for the fair assessment of his capabilities prior to addressing the Shinigami, sending the new map to their Denrai Shinki, and ordering them to use it to rendezvous at one of the remaining 5 barracks and receive orders from a senior officer so they do not have to exhaust themselves by continuing to fight alone now that the Wandenreich has changed the map, resulting in dozens of Shinigami running across the city. Meanwhile, after challenging Mask alongside Rose, Kensei activates his Bankai to gain a pair of gauntlets on his fists connected by a band behind his head. In response, Mask rips off his cloak, promises to defeat Kensei in a 10 count, and launches himself toward Kensei with Star Dropkick, only for Kensei to casually block his feet with his right gauntlet while being pushed back several meters and express disbelief at his lieutenant being defeated by such a weak attack before switching his left gauntlet to a set of spikes and driving it into Mask's stomach. With Mask spitting up saliva and collapsing in pain at this, to the concern of James, Kensei picks him up by the collar and explains that his Shikai can detonate things in the trajectory of its blade, while Tekken Tachikaze compresses the force of those explosions into his fists, burying his right gauntlet in Mask's midsection, which causes the latter to begin vibrating from the repeated tremors racking his body. Kensei declares that this explosive force will continue to assault Mask so long as the gauntlet remains in contact with his body, and sends Mask flying hundreds of meters away into a building. While Rose muses that Kensei will not be needing any help from him, a despondent James tells Mask that he cannot lose, and as a nonplussed Kensei notes that the enemy's weakness is making them look like the villains here. Hisagi pushes himself up from the ground nearby and warns Kensei that he needs to take out James first, just before James begs Mask to come back, which causes Mask to eyes and Mask to glow with golden light while he jumps down from the building, lands behind Kensei and Rose and sends them flying with powerful punches prior to introducing himself. Atop the tower he crashed into, an annoyed Kensei sits up and cracks his neck. However, when Kensai launches himself down toward Mask, the latter appears in front of him with Harinkaku to meet him in the chest with Star Eagle Kick and smash his head with Star Headbutt. Angered by this, Kensai switches his right gauntlet to brass knuckles and delivers a powerful punch to Mask's blocking forearm, creating a barrage of force that engulfs them. Once James cheers for him again, Mask grabs Kensei's fist, proclaims that this has no chance of working on him, and breaks Kensei's right arm with a downward chop before smacking him down to the ground, where Kensai screams in pain over the bone protruding from his elbow. Slamming down knee first into Kensei, Mask sees the latter has lost consciousness and concludes that he will not need a 10 count just before James is ripped in half by Rose's Shikai. Though Mask curses him for harming an innocent fan, Rose counters that loud and noisy guests are not welcome at his dance and refuses to let this chance go to waste after Kensai went to such great lengths to create it before activating his Bankai, creating a dozen large humanoid figures, a large set of hands in the air behind him, and a conducting wand out of the length of Kinshara. After describing Kinshara Butoden as a dance troupe of death whose admission cost is Mask's life, Rose has the figures encircle Mask and initiates Sea Drift, crushing a bewildered Mask in a surging flood of water as Rose tells him to sing his song of pain and dread to the tune of the sea. For his second attack, Rose unleashes Prometheus, causing the figures to blast Mask with fire generated from the petals on their faces, while the latter expresses disbelief at a Zanpakuto being able to use both fire and water. With Mask realizing this must be an illusion, Rose confirms this and asserts that illusions captivate the heart. As the flames intensify around a howling Mask, Rose describes the magma as the boiling fury of the earth for Mask to stomp to with his despair and details how his control of music causes the deceptive melody in Mask's ears to captivate his heart, which means that Mask will burn and breathe his last from hearing the melody, causing Mask to notice that the right shoulder of his shirt has been burned off. However, before Rose can finish him off with Ein Heldenleben, Mask sticks his fingers in his ears, and though Rose states that covering his ears will not help, Mask withdraws his fingers to reveal they are covered in blood. Upon seeing this, a horrified Rose realizes that Mask ruptured his eardrums to defend himself, which Mask grins at prior to blasting a star-shaped hole into Rose's torso with Star Flash and declaring that the villain shall die by the hero's beam of light. Laughing maniacally at this, Mask stops when he sees Rose's hand twitch and comments on his remarkable vitality before unleashing another Star Flash. However, the blast is deflected off 6th Division Lieutenant Renji into a building as the latter appears in front of Rose in new clothes and introduces himself to Mask as a villain. Landing next to Renji, Rukia agrees to lead the battle to Renji and take care of Kensei and Rose, since Mask is no match for what Renji has become and carries them away with a shawl, leaving Mask to question if Renji does not want to gang up on him with Rukia, since villains are free to use whatever dirty tactics they would like to against him. Though Renji decides to fight in a cowardly manner because of this, Mask admits that he cannot hear what Renji said because of his ruptured eardrums and calls on James, whose top half leaps over and cheers on Mask to heal his eardrums as Renji stares in confusion. Despite this, when Mask proclaims that his hearing is better than ever and invites Renji to say something to test it out, Renji simply slashes Zabamoro through James, cutting off his left hand and decapitating him, prior to responding to a mortified Mask accusing him of being cowardly by asserting that all villains are cowards and slashing Zabamoro horizontally toward him as well. Simultaneously, Rukia carries Kensei and Rose through the air, where she muses that the two of them need urgent treatment since their Reiatsu is growing weaker and fails to see a safe place to hide them before coming across the 4th Division's healing station. Upon landing next to 4th Division Lieutenant Issei, Rukia informs her of Kensei and Rose needing immediate treatment for their injuries. Back at the fight, a large amount of blood spurts from Mask's wound and the side of his mask rips open, which leads Renji to state that a hero of justice should not hide their face like a petty criminal. Suddenly, Mask forces his wound shut and multiple clones of James emerge from the bloody remains of the original to cheer Mask on in a chorus of voices, causing Mask's wound to heal and his mask to change color and design, while he reprimands Renji for scratching the soul of a masked man. After his enlarging muscles rip through most of his clothes, leaving him nearly naked, Mask declares that his star power-up is complete, though Renji wonders why it changed his masked appearance and slams his arm into Renji with Star Lariat, sending the latter flying several hundred meters back and crashing through a building. While following Renji into the air to hit him with another Star Lariat that propels him even further back, Mask proclaims that Renji can no longer rest his feet on the ground and barrages him with both Star Rocket Punch and Star Setsujin Punch, which Renji blocks with his arms. With Renji hurtling through another tower, Mask leaps off the corner of a building and activates his Quincy Volstande while promising that Renji will die and turn to dust at the hands of a divine superstar without ever touching the ground. Tracing a large star in the sky with his flight pattern as the clones of James cheer him on below, Mask creates an energy star from it and unleashes Star Flash Supernova by slamming it into the ground below, creating a massive explosion that incinerates the stunned clones. As he watches this from above, Mask assures James that their link will ensure he eventually comes back to life. However, After bidding Renji farewell, Mask sees a large snake skull in the clearing smoke and assumes that Renji activated his Bankai just before dying, something he considers pitiful, but is bewildered when the skull loops around Renji's torso and settles on his right hand with a blade emerging from it as a skeletal green furred hand clambers up to Renji's left shoulder and doubles over on his arm, leaving Mask to question if a Bankai is supposed to change his form like this. Renji activates his true Bankai Suzabimaru, which Mask calls dangerous. With Renji confirming this and noting that he had to work hard in order to be able to speak that name, Mask declares that his soul is burning with the flames of true justice to defeat Renji and flies down toward the latter, who uses Hio to reach out and grab Mask with a large left limb attached to his shoulder. Despite Mask claiming that this is nothing, the hand easily breaks his left arm, causing Mask to scream in pain and throws him into a nearby building, where Mask bursts out of the rubble and curses Renji. Mask vows to abandon thoughts of justice and evil in order to murder Renji for breaking the left arm of the star and flies down toward him, but Renji simply activates Orochio, giving his blade a serrated edge, and leaps up to impale Mask on his sword before twisting it and unleashing Suzabimaru Zagatepo, which creates a giant snake head composed of burning Rishi that bites down on Mask, reducing him to an ashen husk. In the aftermath, as Mask's body crumbles and flies away in the wind, Renji observes that he completely burned himself out and concludes that this is what Mask ultimately wanted. During this, Uwatch observes Mask's defeat from his outdoor throne room and notes that James is dead prior to praising his performance and bidding him to return, causing the ashes of Mask's body to convert to energy that hurtles toward Uwatch and enters his body. With Iryu watching in surprise, Uwatch's body is engulfed by a shadow that slips off the throne and moves a few feet along the ground before clearing to reveal Hashwolf, who explains to Iryu that Uwatch is now asleep and building his strength as the father of the Quincy, which is why his sleep cannot be interrupted at any cost. When Iryu wonders why he is here, Hashwolf states that he and Uwatch are connected only to correct himself that Uwatch is connected to all Quincy, which he knows Iryu has deduced. Once Iryu confirms this, Hashwolf questions if Iryu knows why Uwatch has these powers and if he knows what sort of being Uwatch is, since not even Soka Nishia could have figured it out before deciding to tell Iryu, since he is Uwatch's successor.